Hi, everyone. It's Terry Bruce, and this is another 10-minute nonprofit evaluation tips. Now, this month, we're talking about outputs versus outcomes versus impact. And as I mentioned last week, in the evaluation ecosystem model, this puts us squarely in the evaluation schema bubble. So we're doing a deep dive on what do you want to know and why do you want to know it, including the formulation of your questions and also how you express the results. Now, we talked last week about outputs versus outcomes, and we've talked about that in the blog this month. So now it is time for a little quiz. So we're going to do a little deep dive and see how well you have absorbed the information up to this point. So I have a little quiz here. Keep track of your answers and how many of these you get right or wrong. But for each of these items, is it an output, an outcome, or an impact? The first one, number of people who came to a workshop. Is that an output or an outcome or impact? Well, if we're talking about outcome evaluation, that is an output. So it's the number of people who received services. It is not an outcome because just because they came for services doesn't mean that they learned anything. And remember that an outcome generally is going to be a change in skills, knowledge, behavior, values, or attitude. And just because they came doesn't mean that they had to change in any of those things. Now, if we're talking about process or program evaluation, though, that could be an outcome if we made a change to the program or the process for registering for the class or our outreach efforts that increased the number of people who came, then this could be an outcome measuring the effectiveness of that change. So remember, got to get into the nuance there. All right. Number of people reporting they learned something from the workshop. So they learn something from their workshop. That would be an outcome. So that would be a change in knowledge or potentially skills. Or could be also values or attitude, depending on what you're teaching people. So that most likely would be an outcome for outcome evaluation as to the effectiveness of your programs and services. That is not an impact, though. Sometimes people will say that's an impact. It's not an impact because impact is the cumulative change in the community as a result of people receiving this service. So people learned something, but did they do something with what they learned? Did they go out and make a change in the community, or something in the community change because of what they learned? So it's not impact, it's an outcome. Number of people who reported using the skills they learned in the workshop to improve their life. Output, outcome, or impact. So they learned something in the workshop, and then they used those skills to improve their life. Likely that is an outcome still. It's not impact. A lot of people will want to say impact on that one. Generally not, because again, impact is going to be the cumulative change in the community. Now, if that impact led to some sort of large scale change, so they used the skills they learned in your how to search for a job workshop, and they got a job and the unemployment rate went down in the community, then the change in the unemployment rate is the impact, not the number of people who reported using their skills. The impact in the unemployment rate. So again, nuance and slight difference there, but outcomes, we're still focused on the individual people who receive the service. That very likely almost always is going to be outcome measure. Amount of money your organization raised from donations last year. I'm not even going to give you time to think about this one because I've talked about it last month. I talked about it twice this month already. This one you should know by now is an output. It's an output, except unless we're talking about program or process evaluation for your internal fundraising program, then it could be an outcome, but it's an internal outcome that only you and your board generally are going to care about. It is not an external metric of your organization's success or the change that you're having. What you used the money raised from donations last year to do? Raised $21 million last year, and what did you do with it? What were the services or the number of people you served because of that? Outcome, output, or impact? Well, if you're framing it as we raised $21 million last year and that allowed us to serve 500 people, that's still an output. It's the what you did. It's not. It's actually it's activity. it's activities under a strategic planning model. That would be your activities or possibly your strategies, maybe your objectives. But it's not even an output, outcome, or impact. Now, if you're saying we raised $2 million extra this year and that extra $2 million allowed us to do X, then for a process or program evaluation of your internal fundraising program, that could be an outcome, because that's the results of the raising that extra money allowed you to do these particular services that you wouldn't have been able to do otherwise. But again, depends on what you're measuring. Are you measuring the internal effectiveness of your fundraising? Or if you're talking about the outcomes or impact of your organization and movement towards its mission, then what you use the money raised from is strategy or objectives or activities generally, and its outputs and measures of those things. Number of people served by the money you raised from donations. So the previous question was, what did you do with the money? Oh, we held workshops and served 300 people. And this is how many people we served overall as an organization. Well, again, the fact that you get the money from donations, I mean, unless you're segmenting it and saying, well, this is how many people served from our individual fundraising, this is how many people were served by our grants, this is how many people were served by fee for service. Unless you're segmenting your revenue in that way and tying revenue to service, in which case you might be doing some kind of return on investment analysis, and then this potentially would be an outcome for a return on investment type evaluation. But otherwise, you can take the raised from donations part out of that sentence, and it's just the number of people you served last year, and that's very clearly just an output. Number of new members your organization had this year. Members, supporters, constituents, could be anything like that. Use any word you want. Again, it's like your donors. It's a trick question. It's like your volunteers. If you're measuring the effectiveness of your membership program and changes you made to it using process or program evaluation, then this could be an outcome. But if it's outcome evaluation or impact evaluation, and you're just measuring how many people you recruited to your organization, it's an output at best, and it's not really an outcome focused output. It's not a measure of the effectiveness of your organization. It's just an internal metric of how good you are at attracting supporters. Number of new members who came to one of your events. So this might be a metric of engagement. So people are supporting your organization by actually coming now to your events. Could also be number of new members who donated, who signed up to volunteer, who taught a workshop, mentored somebody else. Same as the previous ones. It's a measure of the effectiveness of your membership program, and therefore could be an outcome measure of the engagement of your members. But generally, this is not going to be an outcome metric for outcome evaluation purposes unless your membership program is designed to change people's behavior. So if you're running a program for high introverts who never leave their home, and X number of people left their home and came to your event, then that is a measure of the effectiveness of your program in achieving the outcome of helping introverts integrate into society at large. And I say that as a very high introvert myself. Then it could be an outcome in that case. But again, the question is always, what are you measuring? What are you measuring? And then finally, number of community members who express gratitude your organization exists. Do you have a big stack of thank you letters that say you guys are fabulous and you do wonderful stuff for the community, and it's great that you exist? Well, people sure are glad you exist. That's great. But what are the intended outcomes of your programs or services? If the change in values or beliefs or attitude is appreciation for your organization, congratulations, you have achieved the outcome. But that is probably an internal metric. That is probably not the end all be all of your organization or your program or service to change values and attitudes and beliefs about the value of your organization. You're probably providing some other programs or services intended for community benefit. So this would be an internal outcome potentially, but it is not an external outcome almost always. It's certainly a nice thing to know, and it's a good metric of maybe your marketing program, of your community engagement activities, just a general, could be a process or program evaluation of your organization and how it's viewed in the community, but it's almost always not going to be an outcome. All right, now, if I don't miss my mark too much, there are a lot of people who are very sad right now, having realized that everything that they use to talk about their organization's effectiveness is in fact at most an internal outcome and or just an output. And the most common ways of talking about the effectiveness of your organization are in fact not outcomes at all. And you have a lot of work to do to now shift your organization to actually figuring out what outcomes are, what outcomes you're having, and how to measure those. Do not fear, we are not done talking about outputs versus outcomes versus impact yet. We still have a couple more weeks this month, and we'll continue diving into this, and then we will get into outcomes the month after next, in a couple of months. We got a couple of other things we want to talk about next month. But basically, if you are feeling very sad right now, congratulations and actually good job, because the outcome of my video has been to change your knowledge to make you realize that you have not been talking about your organization as effectively as you could be. And now you have a better sense of what you need to do and what needs to change. So yay me, I had the intended outcome. Sad for you, who is now sad that all of the infrastructure you've built around evaluation, you realize is probably not effective, and you're going to have to go back to the drawing board to figure out what your outcomes are. If you now want to express your frustration at how I have destroyed your evaluation schema internally, and you're very sad and angry, feel free to do that in the comments. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, and enter the conversation about what your organization is measuring and your evaluation struggles over at terrybruce.substack.com. All right, that's it for this week, and I will see you next week.